Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. We're joined today by former State Senator Phil Harriman and former State Senator and Mayor of Portland, Ethan Strimling. Gentlemen, good to see you.
Good morning, Pat.
Good morning.
Democrats at the State House are set to pass a two-year, $8.3 billion budget, what they're calling a baseline budget, without needing a two-thirds majority. They would then adjourn and try to reconvene in special session to take up additional matters. GOP legislators are outraged by this. Phil, is this a power play or legitimate effort to provide stability?
Oh, it's definitely a power play. I remember in my time in the Maine Senate, the Democrats controlled, and Angus King was governor, and he used this very same procedure to get the budget passed without the need for a two-thirds vote. In this case, I think Governor Mills has got some running room, so to speak, because the budget will pass. There's federal stimulus dollars coming to the state of Maine that will fix any gaps and holes, if you will. But the price is going to be paid 2 years from now. The Maine budget's going to be way out of whack. And this might be the opening that Republicans need to show the people of Maine that putting the Republicans back in leadership will result in a more fiscally prudent government.
That's some wishful thinking right there, brother. Look, back in the 90s, there were majority budgets. There have been majority budgets. There was in 2012 when LePage and the Republicans ran the legislature. Look, in 1999, back in the dark ages when you were there, Phil, there was a majority budget that all the Republicans joined in. It was voted on well before the April 1st deadline. This is a good move by the Democrats. They're doing it to make sure that schools are funded, to make sure that property tax relief is put in place, to make sure that our cities are funded. Republicans showed their true colors in a supplemental budget in which they continued to change the goalposts and move the goal line in terms of what they would support. All four leaders of the Republican Party voted against the supplemental budget. So I think Democrats are looking at them saying, clearly, obstruction is all they're interested in. We want to make sure people get their property tax relief, our schools are funded, and our cities have the resources they need.
Well, if the property tax relief is the goal, why are the property taxes on the school budget in the town I live proposed to go up 8.5%?
Well, that's going to hopefully be dealt with some of the federal money that's coming in. But imagine if the state did not pass this budget, how much your property taxes would go up in Yarmouth.
Well, I think it's more of a discussion of where is the balance. The Democrats have basically said, hey, we're in control. We're going to use this power play, as Pat asked in his question, because we can, not because they really want to compromise with Republicans. It's because they can, and they have.
And Republicans are welcome to join them and vote for it, just like all of the Senate Republicans did back in 1999. They said, it's okay, we can do a majority budget. Let's vote for the rest of the budget when it comes down.
All right, let's move on. Maine Lobstermen staged rallies on land and at sea this past week to protest work that's being done for an offshore wind turbine test project. They say it's going to damage the ecosystem in the Gulf of Maine and hurt their ability to make a living. Of course, Governor Mills is a strong supporter of offshore wind power, but there's also a bill in the legislature that would block all of that development on the Maine coast. Ethan, how do we sort out these competing interests, which are all pretty valid?
Yeah, they are pretty valid. Look, I'm a huge supporter of wind power, offshore wind power. I'm also a huge supporter of the lobster industry. And I think the most important thing is getting people to the table. I do think we have got to deal with climate change. That can't be something that we compromise on in terms of whether we move forward, because, there will be no lobster industry if we don't deal with climate change. So Janet is right to say this is going to happen. But you do need to bring all players to the table. This is a classic example of, I think, that we can find the right answer when everybody's communicating.
Phil, how do you sort it out?
Yeah, I think Ethan's on the right path there. Let's do this in an isolated experiment to see what works and doesn't work for both sides of this equation. Hopefully there is a balance between the ecology and the ability to generate power that's not emitting carbon into the air. There's got to be a solution, and perhaps that this is an isolated experience could give us the information we need before we go large scale.
Democratic leaders at the State House this week unveiled a new package of bills designed to control health care and prescription drug costs in particular. But Phil, how much really can the state manage on this at the state level as opposed to having the feds step in?
That's a really good point, Pat. Back in my time in the legislature, then colleague and State Senator Shelley Pingree and Governor Angus King took on price control of drugs that ended up in a very significant court case. And here we are 25 years later, still having the same conversation. A state of $1.3 million isn't 3 million people isn't going to influence the cost of prescription drugs. This is a much bigger solution than just a little old state of Maine.
It would be great. I agree with Phil. The federal government should be stepping in. Of course, they aren't. It happens all the time. And then the state has to step in. And then sometimes when even the state won't step in, that's when municipalities step in, as you see across the state, like raising the minimum wage, for instance. But some of these bills actually will do some good. Senate President Troy Jackson's got a couple of bills to really clamp down on price gouging in prescription drugs. Got another one, which I think is very interesting. A lot of states have done to sort of create a department within the governor's office that actually oversees affordable healthcare in Maine, to take a look at why are the costs skyrocketing. People in Maine now pay $1,500 more a year in their healthcare costs than the average across the United States. There has to be some reasons for that. And I think having somebody who focuses on that, a department to bring those costs down, that's a really good idea.
Maybe a lieutenant governor could oversee that. There's a new attempt this past week to create the position of lieutenant governor for Maine. The question is, Ethan, does Maine need one?
I actually like this idea for no other reason than, look, and I love Senate President Troy Jackson was just talking about some of his great bills. But if, God forbid, Governor Mills were to pass away, Senator Jackson becomes governor of the state. But nobody's elected him statewide to take that position. It's a default position, and it has happened a number of times in Maine's history. I think we ought to have somebody in that position who was elected statewide, chosen by the voters to say, if something happens with our governor, we now want this person to be in that position. Again, you may like or not like the Senate president, but nobody has a voice for that person except the 35,000 constituents that they represent.
Phil?
Well, Pat, as your question alludes to, we already have a lieutenant governor. It is the president of the Senate. In my lifetime, that person has not had to become governor because of the inability or the passing of the elected governor. I don't think we need another elected bureaucrat, another campaign, another source of funding for an office. I think it works just the way it was supposed to when the Constitution of Maine was adopted, and I don't see any reason to change it.
It doesn't have to be a separate election. In a lot of states, they have the person run with the governor, just like they do the president and the vice president. So you don't need a whole nother campaign. It can be a slate. Therefore, it's a Democrat. If it's a Democrat who's elected governor, that makes sense, or a Republican.
Some grim news again this past week. A mass shooting in a Boulder, Colorado supermarket killed 10 people. It happened just 10 days after that city's assault weapons ban was blocked in court. The shooter apparently bought his weapon after that ban was blocked. Maybe not in Boulder, but be that as it may, President Biden is calling for Congress to ban assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines. Ethan, we've been through this so many times. Is there any chance of any reforms actually happening?
I hope so. And look, my Democratic colleagues have been not just as bad, but almost as bad as Republicans in terms of trying to get something done here. What do both of these shooters have in common other than assassinating all the people that they assassinated? They both purchased their guns legally. That's how easy it is in the United States. And not only legally, but in Atlanta, the person purchased the guns hours before. In Boulder, Colorado, it appears it was days before, maybe a week. We live in this world where it's so easy to purchase guns. The federal government, I hope they do something. I have very little faith, but the state of Maine could also do something. We could ban assault weapons. We could create waiting periods to purchase guns. We could limit magazine size. All of these actions would have a demonstrable effect on the amount of gun deaths in this country. And I can only hope that we finally take action.
It just seems to me that going after the clip or the name of the weapon is going to solve all the problems, when in fact it's the behavior of the person that we need to influence, and more facts need to come out, of course, about these two people who committed these heinous crimes. But it's about the education of the people, and if our laws already say if you are a convicted felon or if you have mental health issues, you cannot own a firearm, we should enforce those laws then and recognize that it's about the personal behavior. And in Maine, the statistics show we have probably the highest proportion of gun ownership in Maine and one of the absolute lowest incidents of gun violence, which is an indication that Maine people understand the responsibilities they have if they own a weapon.
But Phil, it's just not true. In Maine, we have gun violence. We don't want to talk about it. We actually, on a per capita, we're higher than most other northeastern states. But the bigger issue is that oftentimes guns, thousands of guns, are purchased in Maine and brought to other states where some of these heinous crimes are occurring. And that's why, look, we don't even have background checks on all guns in Maine. You can go buy a gun without showing anybody your ID right now. That is terrible. You can buy a gun this afternoon and go shoot somebody tonight. What is the use of that?
So if there's a way, and if you have a suggestion, I think people would be very open to it, Ethan. If you go to your local sporting goods store and you buy a shotgun, you go through a background check. But if you buy it from your neighbor, you don't. If there's a way to fix that, I think there's a very open mind approach that people would want to hear about.
All right, let's move on. The Aroostook County Republican Party rebuked Senator Collins this week over her vote to convict President Trump back in February, using the words, they vigorously condemn her for undermining the conservative and ethical values promoted by Aroostook County Republicans. Phil, this is Susan Collins' home turf here. Now, does this kind of action help Republicans as they look to win more seats in the next election?
No, it doesn't. It just puts a smile on the face of my Democrat friends, Ethan included, I'm sure. But it is a way for the Republicans to say to their senator, we're not happy. Is it going to change anything? No. Has Susan Collins already heard from Republicans that they are not happy that she voted to impeach him? Yep, she heard them and she's moved on. We should too.
Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, I don't often agree with Susan Collins. I obviously agreed with her on this vote, but I agreed more on her stance about it afterwards, in which she said the Republican Party should be focusing on growing the party, not trying to condemn or kick out some of the leaders of their party. The Republicans in Maine are now the third largest party in the state, behind Democrats first, unenrolled, and then Republicans. Look, if they want to go on these witch hunts and police their own like this, I'm certainly not going to get in their way. But the longer they hitch their belt to Donald Trump, I think the less power they're going to have over time.
Senator Collins was busy on Friday, part of a congressional delegation of, I believe, 18 Republican senators who were visiting the southern border. She calls the conditions there and the huge influx of migrants a crisis. Mexican cartels control who crosses the border. She says a young mother from Guatemala sitting on a blanket with her one-year-old told her she paid smugglers $6,000 to get in. Border Patrol is overwhelmed, overworked, and discouraged by new policies. Ethan, this is a huge problem and has been for a long, long time. Is the Biden administration handling this in the way they should?
This is the result of an administration that left office, which basically had zero immigration policy, basically said nobody gets to come in. It created this backlog. The department doesn't have the resources it needs. But I want to be careful to say, I don't think it's a problem when a 1-year-old or a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old comes across our border looking to save their own life, or a mother is trying to bring her 1-year-old child to be able to protect themselves from cartels in other countries. America should be welcoming people into this country who declare asylum. We have a terrible history, of course, in World War II of turning Jews away, or before that, turning Catholics away. We ought to be saying to ourselves, we want people to come here if their lives are in danger. I feel like Joe Biden is doing what needs to be done in order to try to change the policy. I agree it will take time. I hope that he is forceful about it and recognizes we need to lift up the number of asylees that we can bring into this country, lift up the number of refugees, the cap that was put on by Trump, in order to really try to free up some of this space.
Well, I see this very differently. The campaign of Joe Biden to become president many times on the campaign trail boasted that we could take in at least 2 million people who wanted to cross over the border. He ordered the halt of the construction of the border wall. This should not have been unexpected. And in fact, all of the things that they criticized the Trump administration for in terms of putting people in, I'll say, inhumane environments is exactly what they're doing today. They should have anticipated this and had a processing system in place because they knew it was coming, and it has.
The president held his first full-fledged news conference on Thursday. Phil, how did he do? Is it something he should be doing more often, or do people say, I'm happy not to have to think about the president all the time?
Well, I couldn't help but think that that was such a walk through the park for President Biden. He didn't get any real tough, challenging questions. It was somewhat of a tea party, if you will. I hope he does have more press conferences, and I hope the media will drill into some of these controversial issues and ask him to give us the details of his positions and what his plans are.
Ethan?
Yeah, I agree with Phil. I think that he should hold more press conferences. He clearly did a very good job. Everybody, at least in the right wing, the extreme right wing, thought he was going to walk out there and fall on his face. Of course, he didn't do that. He's very seasoned. He knows what he's doing, very smart, very compassionate, spoke both from notes and off the cuff. I think he did a very good job. And, I actually agree with Phil. I don't think the questions were particularly tough. I'd like to see tougher questions too. So I hope that he does hold more of them. But, clearly he's very good at his job.
Let's wrap up with our winners and losers in politics this week. Ethan, we'll start with you.
My loser this week, Representative Bruce Bickford, who had in the back of his screen at a legislative meeting, basically a joke about Harvey Weinstein, who is obviously somebody who committed terrible violence against a lot of women, and he's now being examined for that. So he is my loser of the week. My winner of the week, Phil, I want to ask you a question before I get this one out there. I want to ask you, do you know how to spell the word radiopaque?
I don't.
Want to give it a try?
Nope.
Give it a try?
Nope.
A young man named Oliver Brown, who went to Yarmouth Middle School, is now
great.
a spelling bee champion of Maine, and he spelled radiopaque, which is radiopaque. I hope.
Nicely done. No trophies. And Phil.
My loser of the week is the Biden administration's handling of the border wall. As Senator Collins reported on Friday, it is a crisis and it needs immediate attention. My winner this week is all of the Maine schools that have put their children back to school 5 days a week. Congratulations, well done. Let's hope the rest of the school systems join in.
All right, Phil Harriman, Ethan Strimling, thanks for playing along today. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Political Brew. News Center Maine is back after this.
You're going to get the spelling bee next week, Phil.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Pat.
I'll be ready.
All right.